I'm happiest in the saddle.
A fellow sportsman.
I am an FBI agent!
Great Scott!
What do you say we cut the chit-chat? A-hole!
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria!
Come with me if you want to live.
Hello, and welcome to Retro Ramble. I'm Charlie McGee.
I'm George McGee.
Or is he, or am I? We're not quite sure, because tonight, ladies and gentlemen, George and I are going to be questioning who we are and what the hell is going on, because we are reviewing 1982 John Carpenter's The Thing. Oh my god, I can't believe it's taken us this long to get to this film, but what are you going to say?
We have threatened to do it for some time.
I remember we were going to do this early days. I think there was somebody who was actually pushing us who'd like written a book on it and wanted to do it.
Yeah, there were some guys that were making a documentary about it, and they wanted to record us recording, and then that never materialized. And it probably would have made sense to do it last year because it would have been 40 years. But
Shut up.
What are you going to do?
George and I are maverick renegades who are always going against the grain, kind of like the McCreadys. So, I mean, this is a big film for me. It's a big film for George. It's a big film for everybody. So, if you've been following us on Patreon, you'll know that we have covered Halloween.
Sorry, John Carpenter's Halloween.
Is that one called John Carpenter's Halloween?
It
or is
is.
It just Halloween?
It is.
Okay. He is very precise about where his name features. So we're going to get it into a lot of different areas. There'll be some production chat. There'll be some special features, I think. There'll be some coulda, woulda, shoulda. There'll definitely be some first memories. And then there might be some extra bits that we just throw in because it's not really me. So anything else you want to mention, George? It's 1982. I was 3. You were still a twinkle in Dad's eye. You hadn't been born yet. But I mean, this film hit us later in life, obviously, when we were in our uni days.
But we'll get to that. We're going to
get into all of that. So have you... do we need to do a disclaimer? If you've not listened before...
Yeah.
So if you have listened before, first of all, thank you. If you're a first-time listener, you might not be sure what you've got yourself into. So here's George with just a quick reminder on some general housekeeping.
So Retro Ramble is a light-hearted look back at the films of our youth. So Charlie and I are brothers. And yeah, we reminisce about the films that we grew up with. It's a chance to reappraise them, see, what made them so great. Do they still hold up? Have they been remade, spun off into a Netflix series, that kind of thing?
Yes, yes, and probably yes.
Probably yes. So yes, I say it's a light-hearted look back. So there will be some juvenile humour. There might be some swearing, but we aim to entertain, but we also aim to throw in a bit of trivia as well. But buckle up, and we hope you enjoyed the show.
Excellent. So we like to start off to set the mood to share with you the original theatrical trailer. Do we have it ready, George?
I've got it loaded up on a bunch of chunky cassettes, or maybe a BBC computer.
BBC computer that's going nuts. Okay, yeah. But it's very accurate in its predictions.
It's whirring. It's very, very quick and very precise.
George
with text on screen.
George is in the computer room because that's how big the computer is.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, on with the show. Let's hit it.
Men have just discovered something.
For 100,000 years, it was buried in the snow and ice. Now it has found a place to live. Inside. Where no one can see it, or hear it, or feel it.
I know I'm human. Some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to, but it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
You guys gonna listen to Gary? He can beat one of those things!
Wow. So, George, 1982, John Carpenter's The Thing. I don't know about you, but for me, I feel like the first time I watched this was during our uni days in Manchester. I feel like that's when we all got a bit obsessed with the masterpiece that is Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah, I whilst it's not what we would term in retro ramble terms a revelation, it definitely wasn't something that we grew up watching when we were young. Though I don't know
why parents didn't put this in front of us. It would have kept us
I do actually have a memory of being like alone. I think you'd moved to uni. I was at home, and I think mum and dad were out. And obviously Sophia had moved out a few years previous. I was in the house by myself and channel surfing, as you did back in the day. Does anyone channel surf these days? Does anyone actually watch live TV anymore? That's a different podcast anyway. And I stumbled across The Thing, and I started watching it because, I've heard people talk about it. I
love Kurt Russell. George still is obsessed with Kurt Russell. But then again, who isn't?
We'll get into that as well. And it was roundabout just before one of the iconic scenes where they get the defibrillator out, and one of the biggest shocks in the movie where the guy's chest splits open and cutting of the hands. And I was freaked out. I didn't know what was going on. I was too young. As we say, we've talked about, the fact that you and I are not fans of horror. And I was just like, nope, I'm not watching this. So turned it off and probably put on an Arnie film just to keep myself safe. And so, it wasn't until I think it might have been just before I went to uni. I remember it was with one of our previous guests. It was either with our good friend Andy Hughesy, or it might have been James Glendinning. But I remember getting it out on DVD from Blockbuster.
And saying, if you stay and watch this with me, I think I'm ready to give it another go.
If you hold my hand and we have a stiff drink. But no, we were going back through, we were having it was a summer where we were working we were working summer jobs, and we were doing movie nights, and we were watching it in our old garage, the games room. And I was like, we've got to tackle this movie. I've heard it's amazing. And I don't want to watch it by myself. And I don't think James, I'm pretty sure it was James, and I don't think he'd seen it either. And I think that obviously speaks volumes that was, one of those horror films that had even passed him by. And we were both blown away by it. Just like, oh my God, this film is so intense, so gory, but brilliant. It's the paranoia, which obviously we'll get into. But I think the time that you were saying we were watching it loads at uni was because, and again, we can cover it later in Suspicious Spin-offs, but when we were at uni, the game came out.
Yeah, that was at the PlayStation 2 game,
yes,
right?
Yeah, the PS2 game came out, which was a sequel to the film. But even so, they actually repackaged. I remember they repackaged the film with the same art that the game had. It was very confusing. And again, I was still, as much as I loved the film, I remember my housemate, Adam, playing the game. And I was just like, no, I'm not staying to watch this. It was, very, survival horror, Resident Evil. But it's the fact that in the game mechanics, any of the NPCs could turn into the things completely suddenly. And it was like,
at
shit,
any moment.
Get out of the room. Get the flamethrower. I haven't got a flamethrower yet. Run. All I've got is a broom.
Typical PS game.
Yeah, we kind of had a resurgence in the early noughties, but again, I say we'll get to that in Suspicious Spin-offs.
Well, I think before we make our way to production chat, what are we calling it this time? Production
base camp.
Smoldering melted corpse ridden base camp. Before we go there, do you want to just set the scene in terms of why it's called John Carpenter's The Thing and what had come before? And I think you mentioned it there, talking about the PS game. Was there a prequel recent film? So tell us about what came before, perhaps.
So the Thing is actually it goes back to a novel or a novella. So I think, and what's the difference between a novella and a novel? Is it just like a short novel?
I think, it's a short novel.
So a novella by John W. Campbell called Who Goes There? ? And that was written in the late 30s. And as I think I mentioned this on our Patreon episode on Halloween that we have sort of done to tie in with this, it was adapted into a 1951 movie by Howard Hawks and Christian Nyby called The Thing from Another World. And it was a film that was close to John Carpenter's heart, and obviously, as we talked about in our Halloween revelations,
they're watching it in the film Halloween.
It features more than once, quite a bit. The kids in the film Halloween are watching The Thing from Another World on the telly, but interestingly, the title on the screen only shows the word "The Thing."
That's what I remember. Yeah.
And it was quite prophetic because I always thought, he always wanted to. It was always on his agenda to make that film.
I thought, he'd already done it when I saw that in Halloween. I was like, this must have come after The Thing.
Well, it actually, reading into it, it was it wasn't whilst he was always in mind for the project. So it was actually bought by Universal, picked up the rights to it in the mid 70s. And whilst he was considered in the mid 70s, he was still very much a newbie, an indie director. I think he hadn't, in 1976, he hadn't even done Halloween by then. So Universal and the producers went to other bigger directors, which I'll get into in Coulda, Woulda, Shoulda. And there were quite a few of these directors and writers took different swings at it, and they weren't very successful. But it was understandably the project was put on hold after all these sort of passes. But then when Ridley Scott's Alien came out in 1979, Universal were like, well, maybe we should look at this thing again. Maybe we could get some of that sweet Alien money. And then obviously by that point, Carpenter had become big with the success of Halloween. So he was reapproached, but this was John Carpenter's first proper studio gig, because previously to that, so Dark Star, Assault on Precinct 13, Halloween, they were all indie pictures. They were all like low budget. He'd funded it, so it was a big step up for Carpenter. But Carpenter said of the previous scripts, he said they were all awful, and they were basically trying to change the story in too much. They were ignoring the key part of the original story was the fact that the Thing was a chameleon. It could be anyone. And even in the Howard Hawks movie, it's more of a Frankenstein's monster, and they say it's like it's got vegetable genes, and it's more of like a half man, half vegetable type thing. I've watched,
but in the original book, it is a shapeshifting.
Yes, in the book, it's a shapeshifter. It's the fact it's all a complete paranoia sort of who done it, or who is it, rather than a who done it.
Yeah.
So, and that was the thing that Carpenter wanted to do. He loved the original 50s movie, but that was his one hang-up, was it's a great movie, but the monster could be a lot better. And then he, from reading the book, he's like, oh, there's so much potential to actually tap into that shapeshifter nature.
But then there's obviously John Carpenter sprinkling his own pixie dust on. So what's it going to look like when we actually see it?
And so that nicely segues into Rob Bottin. So I think we've talked about Rob Bottin before because his name came up when we were doing American Werewolf.
The puppet master, the master of puppets.
I think he was 20 when he did The Howling, and then John Carpenter employed him to work on his film The Fog, which I think was the film he did after Halloween. I think that was 79 maybe. And at the time, Carpenter was said to him, and I think Bottin was desperate to work with Carpenter, so he pushed hard to get the job on The Fog. And whilst they're working on The Fog, Carpenter was like, "Yeah, I'm in talks to do The Thing, and I want you to do the monster." So he was just like, "Oh my god." The clever thing that Carpenter did was he got Bottin to work with the storyboard artist to map out the transformation sequences so they could say, okay, this is how it's going to look.
And he knew what he'd be able to actually create with his hands or physically or represent.
Well, Bottin actually says in the retrospective on the Blu-ray, Carpenter even says to him, he's like, so you can do all this? And he's like, I don't know. Sort of I should be able to do it. And it shows you in the documentary, it shows you some of the storyboards, and they are pretty much as you see in the film. And I think that's it about this film, that everyone talks about the practical effects are some of the best, practical effects you'll see in a movie. And whilst in a horror film.
Yeah. So obviously we're quite sci-fi. The only horrors we kind of tolerate here between George and I are the ones. This is my favorite Carpenter film, and it's probably my favorite horror film because I think it's got that Philip K. Dick. It's all the things that George and I like in a sci-fi, So, but for me, it's so gory. It's so gory. It's like I can tolerate the horror because of everything else that's going on. It's not just gory hand chopped off monsters for no reason. Like a lot of horror, in my opinion, is.
Yeah,
my opinion is limited. I get that some people like to be scared. But for me, this is Carpenter's best work. It's phenomenal.
It's funny. I never still find it I haven't.
I'm all shocked. I'm all shocked by it.
The shock hasn't worn off. I watched it the other night, and
stuff you forget because you blanked it out for good reason.
Yeah, I haven't watched it in a few years, and I was just like, oh my god, yeah, this film is so gross, but it's so intense, and it's everything from the sound effects, the squelchiness, and there's the hissing and everything, and just the way it'll suddenly transform. And it is very sudden how quickly the thing can transform and shoot through the floor or grab somebody, and the fact that it's peeling open and growing. It's just the fact it's growing appendages, and it's a mixture of shapes. It is some fantastic. It's so grotesque, but fascinating as well at the same time. And I think the reason why, this is, going back, I was just like, yeah, this is definitely. I think this is John Carpenter's masterpiece. I think it's such a masterclass in tension, in terms of the dynamic between all the actors. So apparently. They spent 2 weeks rehearsing all the crew to sort of try and work out what their relationships were like and how they all interacted with each other and who was mates and who wasn't. And John Carpenter said it was the most prep he's ever had on a film. So yeah, it was really interesting that the fact that by having that time to rehearse, they could work out. It was like, all right, well, you guys are mates. You've never really trusted each other. You're a bit of a stoner, and blah blah. You guys work together, and that helped bring out the tension of these guys just don't trust each other, and things bubbling up to the surface, and then suddenly people turning on each other. It really is something.
Because it starts off with that piercing Ennio Morricone. I always say his name wrong. And I just love the credits, and I love the tension and the fact that it's turned up to 11 from the off.
Well, it sets the stakes very early on, the fact that they're so isolated.
Yeah, that there's not that they're like, well, what are we going to do? It's like, well, we've got the helicopter. They show that they've got the helicopter. They're like, well, they got the helicopter, because that's what I mean. It's like comfortable. It's like they got the helicopter. If anything goes wrong, they can always get out of there, and then they go to that other place. But like, I just thought watching this, because I think it's in the first 15 minutes or first 15, 20 minutes that the gorgeous Kurt Russell and the other everyone in this film, apart from the really young the guys with him at the end. So there's
Keith David.
No, not Keith David. No, because I recognize Gary. But it's Knowles. I didn't.
There's a few familiar faces. Obviously, you've got Wilford Brimley.
Oh my God! Yeah,
the amazing Wilford Brimley. Yeah, who's the man on the BBC computer doing the computations of how quickly it will spread. 27,000 hours. You've obviously got Keith David, who we've talked about previously,
and we'll continue talking about because he's a legend.
he is amazing. But yeah, you've got the guy who plays Gary, who is I think he's the "How dare you, sir?" He's the president in Clear and Present Danger.
And I think he's popped up in other things. Like I think he's probably been in. He's always been very well dressed, like stately person or a general, stuff like that.
You've got the dog guy. That's Peter Massa. I think he was he the dad in the Wonder Years? Maybe not.
Yes. No, somebody else.
No,
maybe.
What was he in? He was definitely in TV. Anyway, yeah.
But then you've got McCready. And there's just a bit where he's talking, I think they're on the way to the helicopter, and it's a bit Jack Burton-y, but it's like, that's just how Kurt Russell talks. Shall we talk about Kurt? Are you ready? Are you ready?
I mean, I don't know if it's possible, but I just find myself falling in love with Kurt Russell more and more as I get older, and the more I watch his films. And maybe it is just watching more of him, like in John Carpenter films, but he's just so cool in this. The fact that he's just like, he's a bastard in this. He's hard drinking. He hates everybody. He's miserable, but I think
the thing is everybody either wants to fuck him or they hate him because he doesn't want to fuck them. I put all of them into that category. It's like the way they look at him.
I mean, he's got the beard, he's got the long hair, but he's got this ridiculous hat, but he somehow pulls it off.
We've got to talk about that because, like, it's so practical because he's got the hoodie and the hat. I'm like, that could be 2023. Some guy out of the festival.
He does look look like he's a fan of IPAs. He does look like he's a trendy hipster.
Yeah, and the goggles. He's got his hoodie up and he's wearing a cowboy hat. It's like, did you just come from Creamfield?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. I'm pretty sure he is single-handedly influencing all of current hipster culture because that's the kind of guy Kurt is.
Yeah,
he's more than man. He's myth. He's legend. He's pure Kurt. He's amazing.
Okay. Calm down, buddy.
Did I say I'm in love with him?
No,
please don't tell my wife.
No, but he is majestic. He's beautiful and a different role. Very much. I mean, I said there was a little bit of Jack Burton creeping out in one of his some of the things you were saying, but other than that, very different role. And there's a lot of close-ups on camera for all of the actors. So that's what I wanted to say about the cast. You were talking about them out to spend some time together. The way the camera moves around, it keeps reminding you that they're all in this together. They're all questioning each other. They're all paranoid to hell about each other. And then, obviously, when you're watching this the second or third time around, you're like, and you're all going to die together.
Yeah. And interestingly, whilst, obviously Kurt had worked with Carpenter a couple of times by that point, so they'd done the Elvis movie and they'd done Escape from New York, he wasn't initially involved. He was helping John Carpenter with, like, casting suggestions, just as a mate. He was helping out, and they were struggling to find the right person for McCready, and Carpenter was like, suddenly turned around and was like, well, why don't you do it? And he was like, oh yeah, that's a good point, I could do it. So yeah, it wasn't they hadn't started of, oh yeah, this is going to be our next movie together. It just organically happened that way.
Well, I mean, we talked about Keith David briefly. I got around to watching Nope the other day, where he's got a very brief role in that. But he's still making movies. We talked about on the other John Carpenter. They Live. It's just like I've enjoyed a lot of his voice in Rick and Morty. You remember me? I'm Reverse Giraffe. And he's also the president.
He is the president
in the Rick and Morty. But such gravitas in that voice. Every single thing he says, you're hanging on every word. But there's a bit of that with him and Kurt, and I think it's great you've got that dynamic throughout. But I like this sort of over the shoulder camera work, and then, as you say, a master of tension that we talked about this on our Patreon episode with Halloween, that there's like he can do things with the camera. Like he can just build tension and build tension and build tension. And then in this film, like much more than in any other Carpenter I can remember, when it goes off, it fucking goes off. It goes nuts. Like what I was thinking watching it this time round was I was thinking about the psychology a lot more and the paranoia. Maybe it's because I'm reading an amazing Philip K. book at the moment, which George has recommended me. Are we both reading it at the moment?
I finished it.
Okay, don't
or have I finished it?
You're not sure.
Am I reading it right now?
Did it happen in the past? Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, you get the idea that we're on a proper paranoia trip anyway, and we stick this film on. But that's what hit me this time round was the fact that when they find that carcass in the
twisted carcass. Yeah.
It's like, what would everyone be thinking there? And what I like about it is it's not like, we got to get out of here. They're like scientists, they're up on this thing. They're like, well, let's find out what went wrong. Let's take some blood samples. And you wouldn't think anything wrong of a husky, and that guy was obviously crazy. They've obviously gone nuts, and they go and check out the base, and it verifies the fact that they've all killed each other. That the dog, there's probably nothing wrong with the dog, and that the guy who came out of the helicopter with a grenade obviously lost his mind. So, that's all I want to say. What was it like for you watching it this time round? Because we've watched it a lot over the years. We've watched it together. I'm sure you've watched it. We've watched it separately over the years. I watched this, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago.
I mean, obviously, there's the things we've touched on. Obviously, there's the haunting Ennio Morricone score, which, as I said in our other episode on Halloween, it's a rarity that John Carpenter doesn't get involved, doesn't get his synth out. But it's a brilliant electronic score. It's very haunting and adds to the tension. Yeah, there's so much dread, and whilst there's not your typical horror tropes of like shock moments, there are different moments that are shocking for different reasons. So I don't know if that leads us into talking about some of the key moments.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Botine before. I think what's nuts is the fact that there's all the tension, and you see, because that's the thing. The reason that moment with the carcass, it's kind of like, sometimes when you start watching a new series these days, I can remember this happened with The Walking Dead. Try to watch that with my wife, and in the first episode, they show you, if you're going to watch this series, be expected to see gore and blood and body and corpses and zombies. And she's like, I don't think this is for me. And I was like, okay. So it's like, I feel like it's like that from the very off. They're showing you, are you comfortable with this sort of image? Because if you're not, this film's going to be a bit of a ride for you.
Yeah.
The Botine stuff just escalates because there's the, as you say, do you want to talk about that scene with the resuscitation?
Well, it's kind of linked. So let's talk about the masterclass intention. One of the best scenes in this film is the blood test scene.
Yeah.
And it's funny thinking about this. This is one of Tarantino's favorite films, and he would actually go on of. Bizarrely, it's a big influence on The Hateful Eight, which is set in a remote, snowy location and stars Kurt Russell. And he also actually uses some of Morricone's soundtrack on that film as well. But you can see where Tarantino gets those. Tarantino's a masterclass of tension, Inglourious Bastards and indeed The Hateful Eight. But yeah, that scene is just you have no idea who it's going to be. Yeah. You think, it's clearly going to be the guy, the dog guy, because he's got so close to them, and he gets shot without a verification, and then you're like, oh, it's definitely going to be Childs, it's definitely going to be Gary, it's got to be Gary,
got to be Gary. Yeah.
Gary's acting funny, and the way it goes through them one by one, and it's just that building up of keep testing, and even just the simple thing of watching them all draw blood, it's very painful to watch.
No, but that way cuts the thumb, and he's like, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could let that amount of thumb out of my...
Just a little prick, though. Why slice open your whole thumb?
Why do they need 2 millimeters deep of like my own blood? I just feel like up until that scene, because there's the bit where the dog goes in the room and you just see the silhouette of the guy, so you're not sure who it is.
Yes.
You think you know who it is, but it could actually be like 3 different characters.
And apparently
I got this time.
They got a completely... It wasn't any of the actors. It was a random person. They got to sit... Because he's like, I don't want... It could be anyone. So
it's got to be ambiguous. And that's about this film, the fact that it all kind of obviously gets there in the end, and it really escalates.
But is the way in that blood test scene, you've got the flamethrower, and he's having
to do a lot. Yeah,
he's having to keep igniting it, and it's you can hear the constant burning of the
sound
flamethrower.
Design is amazing.
But it's also a good bit of misdirection, because they cut to when they reveal, when they do the blood test and the thing jumps out of the blood dish, it's a fake hand. So Kurt Russell's cradling a fake hand, and obviously the creature jumps out of the hand, and it's just the way it's been edited and everything that's going on. You don't notice it switches to a fake hand of holding the jar.
Oh, wow.
So it's really cleverly done. And then
that's a brilliant effect.
Obviously it turns into, it's not Gary, it's the other guy, the stoner guy. And it's just the way he starts like convulsing, and they're all tied to the sofa.
Let me out.
It's so terrifying. You just like, I just remember watching that for the first time, just going, oh God. And obviously the flamethrower's not behaving. And
then I just think that scene, which I thought I'd never forget, I totally forgot about, the guy's head opening up and then eating another guy, and like your reaction, even to this day, watching this again, is kind of the same with everybody else in the same room is just like, like,
and I'm pretty sure the resuscitation scene is the following scene, where it just gets to, he's having a heart attack, it's just been too much, and get the paddles out. And again, it's a masterclass. We've talked about Rob Bottin stuff, but the chest opens up to be giant fangs,
and they just eat it up. Yeah, it is earlier. I think that's what causes the blood test.
And again, it's great movie making, because they switch out the guy playing the doctor, and they got an amputee, a double amputee, and put a mask of the actor over it. And just for that scene of him pulling his hands out the creature, and you don't even notice the mask. And it's only when you go back and watch it, and then you've got the whole thing of the head falling off, the tendrils, and everything's popping, and then the head just grows some spider legs and some eyes on stalks, and it's only summed up in that line, you've got to be fucking kidding.
Yeah, it's it cannot be stopped.
And it's just the way it like peeps out from under the table, like and then skulls off like, I'm out of here.
That to me is very it's almost like big that raises its head in sort of Big Trouble. His sort of sense of humor is like, well, I feel like, that's why I believe this is his masterpiece, because like he hadn't gone into that satire level, like, because it was in his work, and he's like, oh no, we need a little bit to relieve some tension, so let's have it here. But then he leans right into it in Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, no, I think there is some great, I've put that in my notes, as some great black humor. Like there's the shot where they lock up Blair and Wilford Brimley in the store cupboard.
Yeah.
And they open the slot to look in. He's sat there, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm much better. And then just hanging next to him is a noose that he's created for himself. He's like, I'm much better, let me out. And he's like, no.
No.
So yeah, and I think there are other bits that are just like, I say you've got to be fucking kidding me is such a great line, because everyone's thinking that. And yeah, it's the way it all works together. There's bits that I say I have watched this a few times, but there's bits I forget, like the fact that the mini spaceship that Blair's building, that he's
underneath his and the tunnel he's made.
Yeah.
Out of snow, yeah, it's
that's all nuts. And yeah, I do remember the final face-off bit, which is
because you're kind of relieved when the film gets to that bit. You're like, okay, we're in the last act now. There isn't much left, because the middle of this film, you're like, what's going on? I'm thinking that this time, because you see the slider of like where the film's at. I was like, how much have I got to go? Because this is one shocking me, and I know that we haven't even got there yet.
But it's weird that. I think it really sort of dawned on me watching it this time round, which is quite silly, but it's the fact that they kind of realize, I think it was at the start of the third act, it's like, no,
we're all going to die.
We're all going to die. This is a suicide mission.
We're not getting away from here.
We're not, and we can't let it get away. Yeah. We can't let it freeze again. So we have to set this whole place on fire.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't know about you, George. I was thinking very much of hearing
Hicks
just take off, nuke it from orbit.
Well, that's it. But I love
kill it with fire.
I mean, obviously they've got some weapons, they've got some trusty flamethrowers, but the fact is, they've got some explosives, but they don't have military, military stuff. So. Yeah, it's the fact that it becomes that desperation of we've just got to lock this down until we're all dead, sort of type thing, and it's so bleak, but it's so well done, and obviously you're left with that amazing cliffhanger ending.
Well, before we get to that, can we talk about the bit in the generator chamber? Because that to me was the scene I'd forgotten about. Now, why would I forget about like what goes on in that scene?
What with the giant thing?
The giant thing, but also there's that scene where he is it
Blair with the
hand inside this cheek. So I was looking at it this time. It's like it's so clever, like how they've obviously they've grafted additional skin on top of Gary's face so that Blair's hand looks like it's inside his face, and he's obviously injecting tons of the thing into Gary.
Yeah.
And then when he walks away, he's just dragging him by his head. We don't even see what happens to Knowles. And then we think, oh, Knowles is going to appear. And we're going to have a scene, because this is where he second guesses you. We're going to have a scene where either Knowles or Gary's going to appear. And we're waiting, is McCready going to work out that it's the thing? And then no, it's just like fucking Godzilla coming under the ground towards him.
Really amped up.
Destroys all of the amazing weaponry that he's got. He's got the TNT to blow it up. He's got the fucking Molotovs, and it just takes them all out. And then goes, there's the other sort of black
swipe.
The other yoink. I think I'll be taking that TNT thing. Yeah, so I don't know why, but I'd forgotten about that. I hadn't forgotten about the blood test scene or the arms being amputated, but I'd forgotten about the level of gore in both of them. It's just like amazing.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, there's so much to enjoy about this film. I mean, there is similarities with Alien. I can see that, in terms of the bleakness, the claustrophobic setting, the realistic working characters. These don't feel like typical horror characters. You have, as you said, earlier, like they're scientists, well, obviously McCready's a pilot, but they're all practical. They're not, and whilst yes, there might be a little bit of panic, they're not making stupid decisions, or they're mostly.
Well, the whole thing, the way they do the tests and the way they work it out and the way they come to that. It is quite, for me, quite scientific, or like engineers at the very least. It is quite technical, methodical.
So yeah, is there anything else you want to talk about in the film itself?
In terms of best bits, I think we've covered all of them. I think this time around, I was looking much more on the psychological angle, and what else? What else? I think.
I suppose we haven't. So, do you want to discuss the ending?
Yeah, let's talk about the ending, because all of that stuff goes down, and it's very plausible what happens to Childs. That it ties in with what we've seen in the film. There's a bit where we see him. He runs off. He's like, and then he's not seen until the very end. But at this stage in the film, and us as well, we're just like, no,
it's clearly him. It's clearly him.
But is it? I mean, is it that he ran after Blair, got lost in the snow, and has just found his way back? It is plausible.
It is plausible. It is no. I think that's the.
That's what's so good. Yeah,
I think that's the genius of this film. It's not, and people, and it's the debate keeps on. I think I sent you an article. I think it's even raging as recently as like a few months ago, that Dean Cundy, the cinematographer, came out and said, "Oh yeah, it's obviously Keith David, because when I was lighting the scenes, I would reflect a bit of certain light in people's eyes when they were the thing. It was a subtle nod." And then John Carpenter came out. His response was brilliantly brutal, considering he's worked with him quite a few times. He's like, "Yeah, he's full of shit, man. He doesn't know what he's talking about." It made it, deliberately ambiguous. And they actually, they talk about, I listened to the commentary part of the commentary for this, especially for the last act, because it's widely regarded as one of the most entertaining film commentaries, because it's just Kurt and John Carpenter reminiscing and Kurt Russell just pissing himself laughing. I think they're having a few drinks as well. But apparently they were struggling with the idea for the ending, and it was Kurt's suggestion to say, well, why don't you make it a standoff, that they just say, let's just...
Why does it have to die? Because they're probably saying we can't have another action film where the monster's killed and the guy walks away, or he just dies. Well, what would be more interesting?
Well, no, I think one of the original endings that was written was that it revealed that they were both infected, and then it froze, and then it cut to the following spring, and they were rescued by a rescue team, and they were like, "Oh yeah, thanks for saving us. Can't wait to have a hot meal," or something like that. And it just sort of left with that sort of we're all screwed. And even John Carpenter was like, "No, that's just too bleak." Yeah, they were mulling over, well, do we make it obvious that Childs is the thing? Is McCready, is that the twist, that the hero's been taken over? And I remember watching it first time around thinking, could it be Kurt? Could it be him? But yeah, it was Kurt Russell's idea to say, well, let's keep it ambiguous that they're just going to sit it out and see what happens. And obviously, yeah, I think they do just both freeze to death, and that the fact is that neither of them are. But yeah, I think that's the interesting part of this. Everyone's got a different take on it.
And I mean, I'm sure it was done before, and it's obviously been done a lot of times since. But it's much better than the other horror trope that we're both aware of, where it ends and it's like the monster's hand moves with the eyes open,
or something pops out the snow.
Yeah, it's much more up there in the likes of, is whatever is it, Cult, whatever. Sorry, is Christopher Nolan's films. He's done some.
The spinning top in Inception.
The spinning top. Is he actually in a dream? Did Batman really drop a bomb, or is he on holiday with Michael Caine again? And maybe Anne Hathaway, but we would know. But it's. I was just, I think I recently watched, but a lot of films do it well.
Yeah.
But and a lot of films kind of phone it in. I think I recently watched Megan.
Oh, okay.
That's got one, which I felt was just like a bit cheap. Okay.
Yeah.
Some films do it well. Some films don't do it as well. But this, because they give it an entire scene, they give it some heft.
Yeah,
for me, really works. And the way he offers in the bottle, it's like, you're gonna drink, and I'm not getting drunk here all by myself, Mr. Alien friend, or are you?
Well, again, there's another fan theory that's actually one of the Molotov cocktails, and it's a test to see if he drinks it and he doesn't realize it's gasoline, it'll be a telltale sign,
Right. So there's a lot of fan theories about this film.
Yeah.
So that's it for me. Is there anything else you would like to talk about on The Thing?
Well, let's. I think there's definitely a few things to talk about.
Are we going to features? Are we going
No. I think the final thing is we need to talk about the film's reception, because it came out the same summer as Blade Runner, and it was a massive flop. It was And it wasn't just a flop with audiences. It was everyone ripped into it. The reviewers didn't like it as well. Everyone thought that the gore was over the top. The story was boring. E.T. came out around the same time and just devoured the box office. But yeah, John Carpenter says, I've got a good quote from him here. He says, I take every failure hard. The one I took the hardest was The Thing. My career would have been different if it had been a big hit. The movie was hated, even by science fiction fans. They thought I had betrayed some kind of trust, and the piling on was insane. Even the movie's original director, Christian Nyby, was dissing me. So,
wow.
And it's an interesting thing, the fact that obviously Carpenter would go on and make more films and is still doing stuff, bless him, even though he's not as directing as much these days. But it's a big coulda, woulda, shoulda, had this film been the hit it should have been, what would have happened to his career? Because I say this was a big studio film, and I think Big Trouble in Little China was medium-sized budget, but I don't think he really got back to those. He always kept the budgets fairly small and was fairly independent afterwards. But obviously the film has, fortunately been reappraised over the years, and now it's featured in a lot of the best, horror movies lists, the best movies of all time. And yeah, as Charlie and I have both said, it's probably our favorite horror film, even though obviously it's a bit of sci-fi as well. Obviously, we're working our way through John Carpenter's filmography as we're doing this podcast, but it's definitely my favorite John Carpenter.
I just think it's where he's obviously in his sweet spot, and I can understand why he must have been so upset with it being badly received, because it's probably if you look back at all of his work, it's probably where he was doing the best job on the stuff that was most important to him. If you look at Halloween and you look at Big Trouble in Little China, and you've got this. I think an amazing director, but anybody in the business will say, everybody would agree that he is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the best movie directors of his age.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, nothing else for me to say, buddy. Should we move on to some features with some coulda, woulda, shoulda?
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
So, George, we've got Jeff, we've got Celine. I think it's them, or it could just be Thing versions of them. But it's time for coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Going to say, I think there's only one Jeff Goldblum. I think even the Thing would struggle to replicate Jeff. But anyway,
whereas Celine is clearly from another planet.
Clearly.
So for the uninitiated, coulda, woulda, shoulda is when George enlightens us into the actors and sometimes directors who were considered for these films, but for whatever reason did not get selected, did not make the cut. So, George, John Carpenter's The Thing. Who have we got?
So before it was John Carpenter's The Thing, I mentioned in the production chat that there were a few other directors considered. So I think before John Carpenter, there was Tobe Hooper, who was the man behind Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist. Though it's rumored that that's actually Steven Spielberg. He worked on a few drafts, and apparently I think that one of his drafts, it was going to be set like water-based. It was like more of a Moby Dick type thing. And, John Carpenter's like, it wasn't anything to do with a shapeshifter. John Landis, his name came up earlier in the chat. We were talking about American Werewolf in London, so his name was thrown into the mix. Also, Walter Hill, he of The Warriors and 48 Hours fame. And Sam Peckinpah, who's the man who did The Wild Bunch and lots of other sort of violent, western-y type films. So they were all in the director's chair before John Carpenter came on board. However, I was also talking about the fact that Kurt Russell was consulting with John Carpenter before he was cast about potential actors. And there were some really interesting actors who the studio were considering, Charlie.
Is it the usual suspects?
It is the usual suspects, and you'll be delighted when I tell you I'm not a thing. I know I'm human.
I'm just scared of ghosts.
It's pretty spooky. So yes, none other than our favorite Christopher Walken was considered. Also,
but he's so hot. He's so hot.
He was so hot. This would have been around, just after Deer Hunter, and so Oscar nominated. So yeah, Walken was hot property, but also a very reliable actor emerging in the late 70s, early 80s that would go on to work with John Carpenter in Starman is none other than Jeff Bridges.
Starman, that's the David Bowie link. I'm thinking back to A View to a Kill now. I can do Bowie. Of course I can.
And then finally, we have everyone's favorite hobo. God damn it, I'm Nick Nolte.
God damn it, you can put me in the Mandalorian, but don't really put me in the Mandalorian.
It's one of us, god damn it. I think
I have spoken.
Nick Nolte would be good with that gruff paranoia.
Yeah.
Christopher Walken, you would just immediately think he was a thing, wouldn't you?
With that hair.
It's him. It's him.
It's definitely him. There's only one of us is going to crack. I can't really say for myself, but one of us, Childs, I was trying to follow Braille. No, anyway, it would be. Wait, imagine if he was doing the blood test, just with those eyes, the Walken eyes. But I just can't wait for the day when we can just cut and paste Christopher Walken in with AI into every fucking film.
Oh, we will be that YouTube channel.
That'll be us. Yeah. That'll be us. So it's View to a Kill, and everybody is Christopher Walken, apart from James Bond, who is still Roger Moore
and Grace Jones. There's only one Grace Jones as well. Yeah. So yes,
wow,
Walken Vision coming to YouTube in 2025.
That's why I love this feature. It's also like coulda, Walken, shoulda. It's like we're gonna have to get him in the jingle because he's popping up again and again.
Well, it's funny because you always try and sandwich him in there, like, oh, Christopher Walken surely was considered. I'm like, no. But this time, yes,
yes,
not no.
A famous performer.
Yeah. So there you have it.
Cannoli. Okay, that is coulda, woulda, shoulda.
We haven't done it for a while, but shall we do some suspicious spin-offs?
We've talked about a few in this already. We talked about there was a game, and you mentioned there was a prequel. So start with what came first, the prequel. I take it.
No, the game. So the game came out. I think it must have been 2003. I'm going to take a stab at because I think I remember Adam playing it second year of uni for me. So that was 2003. And yeah, so the film. So the game is a sequel and pretty much picks up directly off. It's a team, a military team arriving
go to
on
investigate.
Base.
Yeah, like an Aliens version.
Yeah, and it's only, I think, halfway through the game that it reveals. I can't remember what happens to Childs in the game, but McCready I think he's still alive, and they've captured him, but he's not the thing, and they're interrogating him. So yeah, that was a sequel to the film, and bizarrely, I know one of the guys that through my current job who worked on that game, and they actually got as far as working on a sequel to that game as well, and they were working up some really weird and wonderful creature creations for the sequel, but sadly that game got cancelled. But before we get to the prequel, which I think is 2011, there was, I think it was around the same time as the game. It was definitely mid-noughties. There was a script written by a protege of Frank Darabont called The Return of the Thing, and it was going to be Sci-Fi Channel. We're going to do like a 2-part miniseries. So Sci-Fi Channel that had during that time, obviously TV was the TV miniseries were quite big. So Sci-Fi had done a Dune series. They did the Battlestar Galactica remake, which then turned into a several series thing. So there was actually some decent money, and there's a brilliant podcast the best movies never made, where they talk to the writer about it, and it's a real shame that it never happened, because it sounds fascinating. It's the best way of describing it, and they say this in the podcast. It's basically what Aliens is to Alien. That concept that it's the Russians pick up the thing and start testing on it, and then they're flying, for some reason they're flying over America, I think, to transport someone back from Antarctica, and he starts having a heart attack, and the plane crashes in small town New Mexico, like in this desert little town, and just starts infecting the whole town. And it's a complete like paranoia thing of, they've got all these different characters being a TV series, and it's who's it infected, who's next. And there's this Russian scientist that's a bit like, what's his face, Donald Pleasance from Halloween, going, no, you've got to stop it, it's going to get out of control. And it is that sort of escalation of it's infecting all the animals. And I think there's even a scene where a guy's like making an omelette and cracking eggs, and when he gets to like the third egg, it turns into a thing. So it's brilliant. It's like anything can be a thing. And yeah, as I say, it's a real shame that it never got past the sort of the scripting stage. It's been a while since I listened to it, so I can't remember why it didn't make it to screen, the small screen, but I'll put a link in the show notes, or I'll put it on the social channels for one to listen to, because it is, I say, a really interesting listen and an interesting story. But yeah, there's finally the prequel. So have you not seen it?
I was going to say, I haven't seen it, and as I already said to George, is it any good?
It is interesting. It is good. It's just not different enough. The fact is, it's a bit of an odd...
Just a follow-up question, sorry, because it was joined. Is Kurt Russell in it?
Sadly not.
Mic drop.
I'm out of here. So yeah, it's a bit of an odd one, because it's a prequel, but it's clearly trying to be a bit of a remake. And they just call it The Thing, which just makes it even more confusing.
So is this the Swedish bunch?
Norwegians.
Whatever.
So yes, it's all the Norwegian base, but for reasons, for box office audience reasons, they invite an American scientist to the camp who becomes the sort of the Ripley character. But yeah, it is pretty much a bit of a remake, but it's also a prequel, because it's basically you're seeing the exact same thing happen, but it's to the Norwegians. And it's quite clever in the fact that you don't, I think it's, what's her face? Mary Elizabeth Winstead. She's the scientist, but it's got Joel Edgerton, who's basically the MacReady wannabe. But outside of that, you don't really know who it's going to be. And there are some nice little nods in the way it basically, you can tell there's a lot of love and attention that's gone into the film, that they've gone like set up stuff that you see in the John Carpenter one, like the axe in the wall. You see the guy who's slitting his wrist. They take all those key moments and they expand on them. And even the thing that, the half melted, half burnt thing, you get to that halfway through the film. So
what about effects wise?
So that's where
better or worse? Because I mean, you're going up against both teams.
Well, worse, and it's a real shame. And there's some good. I'll try and dig out some links online, because the director was a huge fan of the original and wanted to be as faithful to it as possible. And he said his approach was like, I want to do it as much practical as possible, so it can stand side by side with the 1982 one. And they got a very talented special effects company. It wasn't Robo Team, but I think it was Amalgamated Special Effects or something like that. And it looked amazing. And then they showed it to the studio and they were like, looks a bit rubbery. Why don't we put some CGI on it to make it look cooler? And it just ruins it. And it's a real shame, because you can see, as I say, there's comparisons videos online where they've tried to make it more interesting by what the thing's doing, but it's clearly just rubbery CGI. And some of the practical effects that you do see is really impressive. So yeah, it's a bit of it's not a complete disaster. And one of the coolest things is the ending. It ends with the helicopter going out, the guy loading up the gun, and I think someone has even done on YouTube, spliced them side by side, and it's really well done. So
it works.
I would recommend.
It's not. I will get around to watching it then, from what you tell me.
Yeah, I do. Well, I did have a copy of it, and I was going to lend it to you, but then I lent someone else who has lost it, who won't be named. It's an interesting watch. If you're a fan of the film, I say it's never going to be close to, obviously we've talked about how good the 1982 film is, but it's an interesting companion piece.
Okay. Joel Egerton, he's not the guy in Avatar, is he?
No, that's Sam
Worthless.
Yeah, Joel
doesn't
Edgerton
make a good or a bad film, just makes lots of films.
Joel Edgerton is also an Aussie, and a bearded Aussie, and looks similar, but I think he has a bit more talent and a bit more range than Sam Worthington.
I've seen him in more things, Joel Edgerton. What have I seen him in? Oh no, he's in he's in that film about the two fighters with Tom Hardy. Warrior, and he's a good actor. He's decent. Yeah, I rate him. Okay, brother, is there anything else? It's Halloween. Is there anything else that we need to talk about when it comes to The Thing or horror type movies that we cover on the podcast?
No, I just want to say, obviously, I'm glad we finally got around to doing it. Our favorite horror movie. I don't know where we're going to go from here. Obviously, there will be other.
Where do we go now?
Where do we go? Time will tell. But if I always put it out to the listeners, if there are any classic 80s or 90s horror movies out there that you think Charlie and I be brave and check out, if we haven't seen, let us know in the comments. Obviously, we've done a few horror films. We've done some horror comedies like Beetlejuice and Ghostbusters, I suppose, is a horror comedy, but we've also done Scream, done Thing. So
we could just, if we ever run out though, George, we can just start doing films that are so bad it's terrifying.
Yes, I mean there's plenty of old movies, the old horror movies. There's the Hammer horrors. So yeah, there's plenty of horrors that, and I'm sure there's some of the like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Streets that just they haven't got Rob Bottin on, and the effects just don't hold up as well, and are just a bit laughable. So they may be worth a venture at further down the line.
Yeah, no, but I really enjoyed watching this film. I always enjoy watching this film, and I can't wait to watch it again with you, because just to have somebody to laugh at when just those special effects go nuts, and the noise and somebody's head being bitten off by a 3-headed monster that's come out of nowhere and gory blood everywhere.
We should try and do the prequel and back to back, and it maybe somewhere in a snowy location.
Yeah, when we're skiing, that could be fun.
Have a few drinks, see what happens.
Yeah. So as you've heard us mention a few times, we are doing the old Revelations, the films that passed us by. We didn't get to The Thing until we weren't living at home anymore. This was what for me anyway. And there are other films that fall into that category, so we will continue doing Revelations to separate it from the 80s and 90s that we cover on the usual monthly episode. But if you like what you're hearing here and you want to hear more, check it out on Patreon. We've got bonus episodes. We're going to have some more juicy goodies coming your way, some more extras. So if you're a Patreon subscriber already, there is going to be more to look forward to in the future. I also know for sure that we have, I'm not sure what we're doing for Christmas, or I'm not allowed to tell you because George will have to kill me. But I can tell you that I think we've got some Quentin Tarantino goodiness coming up in the months to come. So George, anything else you want to mention before we sign off?
For a Christmas movie, can we do the one that's got Kurt Russell as Santa Claus?
Those aren't bad films. I've had to suffer both of those. And Goldie Hawn turns up.
Exactly. I've watched them lots of times. And
with our children.
Is it wrong to be attracted to Santa Claus? Anyway.
My daughter's already got designs on marrying Santa Claus. When she found out he was responsible for all the presents, she was like, I'm going to marry him.
Especially if he looks like Kurt Russell.
I think it was probably that film that pushed her over the edge.
She's only human, or is she?
Yeah. So, or is she the thing?
Is she the thing?
Or Are You the Thing? Yeah, so, oh my God, I'm in such a, I say I'm loving the Peter K. Dick book, which I recommend to anybody who likes.
Philip K. Dick, not Peter K. Dick.
Philip, what? No, how do you know that's not his name? In a parallel universe, that could have been his name. Philip K. Dick, Ubik. That's a bit of a revelation. George and I have read most of Philip K. Dick's work. Obviously, Philip K. Dick is responsible for Minority Report, Blade Runner. What else?
Total Recall.
Total Recall. This guy is a legend. So if you do like your books or your audio books, highly recommend Ubik. Okay, so stay in touch with us on retroramble.blog, on all the social channels, wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you're listening to this.
Leave us a review if you enjoy what you're hearing. Recommend us to a friend.
Or, as we say many times, send us your Apple logins and we'll do it for you.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you for listening. For this episode, I have been Charlie McGee, and you can tell by the special glint in my eyes.
I've been George McGee.
Or has he? I'm just not sure anybody. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.